Hi there, I'm Stephen, and welcome to the GrimDark Grotto. Today, I'm going to be talking about bases. Okay, so for this video, we're going to be talking about bases for your miniatures. Bases are a great way to keep your miniatures uniform, so they can be tied in easily with the setting that you currently have. With your bases, instead of just keeping them this regular boring and black, you can embellish the model a bit, help it narratively with a bit of like visual storytelling. An important thing about your basing as well, if you are creating an army or a setting where the models will be appearing in like kind of all at once, it's always well advised to do all your bases in a very similar theme. So today, the theme I'm going to be doing is a rocky terrain with snow, as my army is based on a frozen death world. So when doing your bases, you can go as elaborate or as simple as you'd like. It's completely up to you. It's part of your miniature that can be very unique to other people's minis, so it is worth having a good think on. Today I'm going to be showing you a very basic way to apply some texture to your base without needing expensive materials. And to start with the regular 25mm base, to add texture I'm going to use only some super glue and some regular old table salt. So all I'm going to do is just take a little bit of super glue and pop it on my base, and I'm going to cover it entirely. When you're doing your bases, you can use almost anything to add texture to it. You can use a lot of natural things such as small pebbles and stones, sands and things like that. You can also obviously use like cut-offs from plastics and stuff. Before I add in my salt, I've actually taken the time to get a few stones. I'm going to be adding this at the back of the base. We'll be painting over these later, but this should help to add some very easy and decent looking texture. I'm just going to arrange them like so, just so they don't interrupt where my model will be standing. And you can do this with the model on the base or off. I typically like to do it off the base, but that is entirely up to you. So I always find it a little bit easier to have your model off your base while you're painting and mucking about with. There's not a lot that you can do wrong. I would encourage people to experiment, see what works for you. Like today I'm using salt instead of sand to apply like a grit effect. It's not a super common thing. People typically use sand. But like I said, whatever makes you happy, whatever you think works, you should. The only thing I would always advise on is if you use natural materials, make sure they are dry or non-degradable as well, or at least not quickly degradable is a good rule of thumb. Just get rid of the excess. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave that to dry. So while I was waiting for my super glue to dry, I also decided to add a little skull for a little bit of extra decoration. These come in some handy little terrain packs from Games Workshop. Now that the super glue is dry, I am going to base it with a black primer. What I'm using is the Army Painter's black primer. When priming, always make sure to open up a window and the room is well ventilated like we've done here. Now just wait for that to dry. Now that that's dry, I'm going to add on a little bit of Zandari dust to add a little bit of colour to it. I'm not applying this too thickly, I'm just going to kind of dry brush it along. And don't worry if like some of the texture's being knocked off, it will do with it being such a fine grain. Still though, with the primer on top, pretty much all of the salt or sand will hold. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to do our little skull buddy using some Screaming Skull. Before we add on the second layer of that, I'm going to add on some Esham Grey onto the stones as well, just to kind of pick them out and make them a little bit different from the ground. I would always suggest that finishing and modelling your bases is, I would almost say, necessity for any of your minis. I'm just adding on a second layer of Screaming Skull onto our skull. With it being a layer colour and the skull being black, it will take a couple of coats to really get that colour that we're looking for. I'm just going to give a little wash to the base with some Nuln Oil. Just like I said, remember, you don't need to follow this setup directly. You can use any kind of colour, you can use any kind of texture you like. Best advice I can really give to anybody doing bases is just experiment and do what you like best. Now that that's dry, I'm just going to add a little bit of Celestial Grey to both highlight the dirt a little bit. I'm going to put some on the edges of the rocks as well. going to add on a little bit of Agrexer shade onto our little school buddy. Now I'm going to be adding a little bit of a snow effect. And for this, I won't be using anything homemade, but I'm going to be using some Valhalla Blizzard by Citadel. This is a great little line of paints they have for adding texture to your bases. It's expensive if you want to do mass scale, but in another video I'll show you how you can make some homemade alternatives to it. But for now, I'm just going to add this on, maybe around this rock area here, and some of the edges, just to add in a little bit more of a winterized vibe to our terrain. And there we go. Nothing too crazy. And with our snow dry, I am going to glue the miniature onto the base. Now, once you've painted the base, it's always a good idea, well, I personally like to use super glue. Plastic glues always adhere really well to plastic bases, but they can cause your paints to melt and could potentially ruin some of the surface. So to be safe, I'm going to be using some good old-fashioned super glue. And just to tie it off, I'm going to go around the rim with some Baden Black, just tidy up the edge of the base. And with that, our Chaos Space Marine Sergeant is ready to join the lines of chaos and crush the armies of the Corpse Emperor.